Well then, I'm going to transfer us to our faces. Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host,
And
Buddy.
today we're going to talk a little bit about stealth archery. But before we do that, buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
Well, on this podcast, we like to talk about games, and I guess today's game is like 9 years old because we're functionally talking about Skyrim.
Yeah, I mean,
This is like the eponymous game for it, I guess, but it is a problem
mi-
that permits many, pervades many games.
yeah, I was going to say, like, you might even make the case that this is like an Oblivion problem, right? Like,
hmm hmm
um, anyway, just to kind of set the stage, in open world games, there is this tendency for kind of like the optimal build to converge on stealth archery. And it's not always stealth archery per se, right? Like sometimes it's like, stealth sniping in like say Far Cry or whatever. But that always seems to be like the way things go, or at least like the way that everybody like dips their toes in a little bit. And figured to be an interesting topic to try and kind of explore why that happens and maybe ways to kind of discourage that from happening. Um, and do you have any initial thoughts
I
on?
have a couple of hypotheses. I guess I would say three hypotheses going into this that we can kind of address. Number one is, I guess, that this is very water finds a crack, which is to say that the optimal um, path is kind of not mechanically, but sort of I guess I would say obliquely or abstractly a stealth archery path, right? Staying incredibly far at range and killing guys or defeating enemies before they even have a chance to react to you. It's sort of like, which is what stealth archery like describes,
Right.
right? Is sort of just definitionally the most effective way to be engaging in combat for like most groups or like games, right? Obviously being at ranged means that you can, you are increasing the radius at which that you can influence the map and like influence the world. So if I'm just sitting on a hill sniping people, right? All of these people are in range. I'm not moving. I'm not really changing my like dynamics. I don't have to worry about, patrol patterns or anything kind of along those lines because really at the end of the day, all I have to do is just sit and snipe. And if my stealth is working out fine, right? And I can just like headshot these guys for a gazillion damage, and then they fall over dead. It just effectively instantaneously removes the challenge, right? So like this is sort of part of my like bedrock of stealth archery, which is just that it is water finds a crack, the easiest abstract thing that a player can go for. Hypothesis two is that AI contributes to this, right? Uh, you could see a scenario where like a very advanced stealth game or stealth game system combats that issue by saying like, okay, the guy watches his friend die, and all of a sudden he is, you know triangulating where that shot probably came from, and they are now looking up at the mountain towards you, and like they are chasing you down in the way that a
Or at the
real
very least
world.
hiding, right? Like,
Right, exactly, right? Like hiding, taking cover behind, whatever. Like in the real world, you can imagine that if there was sniper fire, right, people would be reacting differently than walking around looking for a sound, kind of head empty, right? Like, so I think AI really, really contributes to this, right? We don't have very complex AI for dealing with these sorts of situations. Um, which makes it even more overpowered. And then thing three is that there is not as much progression, like there's not as much satisfying progression to stealth mechanics in the same way that there's satisfying progression to regular mechanics, which I have found to mean that like regular conventional sort of like spray and pray combat encounters tend to be more mechanized and require more sort of like inputs in order to be successful. This is the most confusing way to put this another way. If I want to be an effective spray and pray character, I need to take lots of perks or talents or upgrades or whatever, right? I am building out my build in a wide variety of ways because there's a lot of ways. Oh, my health is increased, my armor is increased, I can do better damage with I have crit chance. Like there's all of these different stats that you can systemize, and all of those get piecemealed out in kind of like tiny iterations. With stealth, there just aren't that many like systemized options for that kind of thing. So it tends to take fewer talents to make a strong stealth build than it would to make a strong like attack build, if that makes sense. Inside of these games, right? Like when I look at the way that perks happen in Skyrim, or you unlock those talent things in Far Cry, 1 point towards stealth gets you so much farther than 1 point towards combat.
Okay.
Those are my hypotheses.
So I think I'm with you on most of those. I think I've got a couple more to add to this.
Okay.
I think part of it is it's kind of is it's I think the biggest one to me is like it's free, right? Like and it's also it's free in its one way, right? Like you can always start a fight out with stealth archery and then run in and do like the spray and pray stuff, but you can't run in and spray and pray and then like revert back to stealth archery. And not only that, but like it's not like there's any consequence to starting with stealth archery, right? If you are it's like a meme somewhere that kind of describes this, I think, pretty well, which is like, if you're the two-hand axe wielding barbarian, right? You could just run in, but like, why not start the fight out with a stealth archer, like with an archery shot, and you get the damage multiplier if you stealth, right?
Yeah.
So you might as well shoot that first shot as a stealth archery shot, and even if you just end it there, then like you're using it, but you probably don't, right? It's like, well, I took the guy out and they're not reacting, so I might as well take a second stealth archery shot. And it's like, well, I'm gonna go upgrade. I could upgrade my axe, but like, it'd be really effective if I could get another stealth archery shot off, right? Like,
Yeah.
So it's like even like the double-handed wielding barbarian benefits from stealth archery, whereas the stealth archer doesn't benefit from those other skills. And so part of it is like, and so I think a large part of it is like stealth archery has a place in every build, right? Like,
Yeah. I also think a corollary of that, by the way, is that when a stealth archer fails a scenario, you could say, right, as a stealth archer, I need to carry an axe so that if I do fail my archery, right, I can take out this axe and start beat sticking people, right? But the failure state of a stealth archer tends to be save scum. It doesn't
yeah.
tend to be take out my beat stick, right? Whereas the failure state of a barbarian is to beat stick. So in a certain sense, you are creating a failureless state by like focusing towards a stealth archer build.
See, I also wonder if like part of that too is it's like it is inherently easier to to save scum stealth like essentially a sniper position of any sort, right? Like you take the shot, you knock the guy down, right, and then you can save. That way, when you load, you've already like you're already like a guy or two in, right? Like whereas you saving in the middle of a melee fight is a great way to make an unusable save, right? So, so like. Yeah, I think that's part of it too. But I think the more interesting part of it, because I think these are all valid points, right? There is like it's kind of like I think these all kind of like naturally funnels into water finds a crack, in like is like in like some way, right? Like these are all ways in which stealth archery is an effective tool in any character's toolkit, and so ends up kind of being the even if it's not the dominant strategy for any particular character, it's a strategy that every character engages in to some effect, right? Like with some mild variance, but that's I think essentially it. But the thing I'm really interested in is kind of like how to discourage that, so that games truly have like if you're going to make it part of like a hybrid character, it has to be intentional. If you're going to make it part of like that it's not just like a thing that you do anyway on your on your melee focused character, that kind of thing. And something that came to my mind, and I know we've both played this, is I think a game that does a good job in at least like leaning in that direction. I don't think it gets it perfectly, but Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I think, and maybe I haven't played the previous Assassin's Creed games, so I don't know if they're any better at it, but I think it does a pretty good job of making it making stealth archery not kind of like the default. Maybe part of that is just that like you're replacing stealth archery with like stealth killing. um,
Well, so I have some interesting thoughts about that. I guess
okay,
in the sense that I get what you mean about Assassin's Creed Valhalla, but one of the things that defines my playthrough of Valhalla is that maybe it's just like the combat mechanics are good. Like, I don't know how else to describe it in a way. Like, I don't really think that the kind of run and gun version of playing Skyrim is as fun as playing the run and gun version of Valhalla. Whereas, like, when I look at Valhalla, I could, if I wanted, kind of be like running around doing stealth stuff. But I'm like picking up like spears and and axes and shit. And like, it's just fun to use those weapons, right? And to be
right.
good at that combat, and to be dodging and to be parrying and all of this stuff. Like they just have like, I don't know, intuitively fun and engaging mechanics when it comes to actually engaging in the combat. So it is less a water finds a crack scenario, because water finds a crack kind of describes a negative like value set, right? Where I want to defeat a challenge in the easiest way possible, right?
Right.
But if the goal is positive, if the goal is I want to have as much fun as possible, water finds a crack doesn't define that. Like what defines that might just be swinging a big old greatsword in Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a lot of fucking fun. like
Yeah,
um
but that is the kind of fundamental water finds a crack thing, right? People stop doing fun things because it is more effective to do something else, and that's the problem, right? This is like the loot cave, right? Like is the classic example, right? Like it's more fun to go like do a strike at Destiny, but if you can endlessly fire your automatic weapon into a cave and get loot out of it, you're gonna do that anyway, right? So I think there's got to be a little bit more of a balancing factor there. Um, and maybe it's just that like stealth archery in Valhalla isn't so much more effective than the fighting that it like
You know what's funny is that I actually went very hardcore into a stealth build in Valhalla, but I end up not doing a lot of stealth archery. Like the bow I have equipped most of the time is the stealth archer. I think it's called like a viper bow. I don't know. It's the one that gives you a headshot reticle,
right.
you know, which is like, what is this for or whatever. But I find myself in a situation where a lot of the times I just kind of like approach an encampment and I like plink a few guys down. And then eventually somebody finds something. I'm like, okay, well, let's go loud. And then I just start
Yeah.
wailing on dudes. I think part of what happens there to make that compelling is that Valhalla rewards stealth gameplay and hard like hard action gameplay in tandem with one another, right? For instance, in there's three different trees. There's the bear tree, the wolf tree, and the raven tree. The raven tree is like the stealth tree. It's the one that I like filled all the way out, basically, right? But there's actually a lot of stuff in the raven tree that powers up my ability to just straight 1v1 a guy in combat. Which is stuff like my point. Like if I kill somebody with a poison on them, they drop a poison cloud that poisons other guys. So like that's not something that ever pops up in stealth scenarios, let alone stealth archery scenarios, right? So it is all about picking up my great sword and actually using this kind of like chain poisoning mechanic. So even though I am deep in what is otherwise the stealth tree, I have stuff that is pointing me towards kind of hard combat gameplay, right? And there is also, like one of the things that you get when you're going down one of these trees, right, is you get bonuses with weapons of that type. Well, it's not that the Raven weapons are only daggers or, like whatever. The Raven weapons are also greatswords and spears, right? They're flails and axes. And like that piece of it, I think also drives people into sort of like a combat size piece of the gameplay. So like even though I am very effective at the stealth stuff and I want to do a lot of the stealth assassinate murder guys stuff, right? And I do start basically every single encounter in that way. When I have to fall back on the great axe, I have a lot of stuff to fall back on. I don't just immediately die because I'm so deeply invested in stealth that it doesn't work out otherwise.
Yeah, maybe that's a big part of like because I will point out that what you essentially described at the top of the Valhalla thing was it what we were talking about. It's like a stealth archery thing, right? Like you do take the stealth archery shots at the beginning. I was gonna say that I think it's the predator or whatever they're
The
called, but
predator bow, that's what it's
yeah,
called. The viper bow, I think, is the is another one. Who
Yeah.
cares?
So I actually like to know, like I'm personally like my aesthetic is like big damage, and that's like the headshot thing. But like I actually like the bow in combat more. So like I actually don't the predator bow as much because when I'm using the bow, it's in the middle of combat, and so I like the kind of
Hmm.
like more outward one. But I think part of this is that everybody has every class of tool, right? Like, or every like in Skyrim, you might not have magic or a two or a hand weapon other than like what you feel like you need like minimally, right? Like,
Yeah.
the bow occupies your bow slot, and your weapon occupies your weapon slot, and so you're always using it in uh in Valhalla, right? Like to your point, right? Like it's not even like you have to hit a button to switch to your great sword. It's like when you were in the melee scenario, your great sword comes out, which I think is an important thing. But I think part of that too is that like every character is kind of like a hybrid character, right? Um, I wonder, and maybe this is just kind of the nature of having an open world game like not being able to do anything particularly well, right? But like I wonder if there's a way to like build one of these open world systems where you truly reward somebody who is a dedicated any one of these things, um, that like that kind of like I don't want to say discourages, but like makes unnecessary like using the whole toolkit, right? Like,
That's interesting. I think when I think of that, I think of Deus Ex Human Revolution's director's cut. Um, so when Deus Ex Human Revolution came out, one of the big things that got a lot of flack for was the boss fights sucked because if you went a stealth non-combat build, you had no way to deal with the boss other than pick up a gun and shoot it a lot, and you were really bad at that because you didn't invest in it at all. And so when they revive maybe it was a DLC thing. I don't remember. They whatever the case may be, they came out with a director's cut,
I think
and
it's
in the
when they released
director's
it on the
cut,
Wii, funnily enough.
okay, well, whatever the case may be, they updated the game with a bunch of different ways. Like, so one of the things that creates, I think technically the genre is called immersive sims. One of the things that like the 0451 games, one of the things that creates these immersive sims, right, is this idea that you can tackle a problem with a bunch of different approaches, right? So the approach specifically for Deus Ex now becomes I can in the same way that I was able to stealth past a bunch of guys and like quote unquote defeat that encounter by like memorizing their patrol routes and hiding and moving when I need to, like whatever, I could now do that sort of thing in a boss fight and win a boss fight, right? So the first boss fight, for instance, you can stealth out of that boss fight, go and hack a computer, and it will spawn turrets that kill the boss, and you do that 3 times. It's like phases, sort of like in a WoW encounter sort of thing. And you can beat a guy. So if you're hacker focused or if you're stealth focused, you have an option to kind of like defeat a boss encounter that is still challenging and difficult, but it's challenging and difficult according to the playstyle that you've kind of like run up against, right?
Right.
And I think maybe that's one of the only examples I can think of a game that was able to provide appropriate challenges for different sorts of characters, like unilaterally, if that makes sense, right? If I went heavy melee, I could melee this guy. If I went heavy, ranged, I could range this guy. If I went stealth, I could stealth this guy, kind of thing. I feel like in most open world games, there's just like not a good option for that. And by the way, Valhalla is also sort of this way. There's a bunch of boss fights in Valhalla that you just have to sit and fight, which is like, which is good that they made every character a hybrid character, because it helps sort of head off that problem, I guess.
Right. Yeah, yeah, right. Like you were saying, even if you go into the stealth tree, you end up picking up nodes that make you decent at like normal combat.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's just that my normal combat looks different than the normal combat of the other, like of the other varieties, right? In a boss fight, I am trying to apply and reapply my poison over and over again because my poisons do so much damage compared to my, I don't know, whatever a fucking bear guy
yeah,
is good at.
dual two hand wheeling is what is like the I think the signature kind of ability of that tree, right?
Holy shit! Why did I not go that tree? That's fucking sweet. I love one-handing two-handers. That's like
Yeah, no,
it's
it's
my
actually
aesthetic.
yeah. So that's actually interesting thing about that game is like you could pick that game up and like respec into that like at zero cost, which is super interesting. I don't know.
That's true. I mean, in a certain sense, that's like kind of the I guess I would call that like I think of this as the WoW solution, right? If instead of saying you need to be equally as good at this kind of content as this kind of content, they just let you rebuild, right? When I
Yeah.
go from raids to Mythic Plus, I just change all my shit to be Mythic Plus focused rather than raid focused, right? Um, Rather than saying, like, oh, every individual talent is just as good for like both, because
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean that's true, but like I feel like that really loses it. Like I think it works in WoW because WoW is kind of like more about kind of the meta scenario, right? Like
sure.
like canonical Baron, right? Like for RP purposes, has I assume like a loadout, right? Insofar as that matters, right?
That's
Like
actually yeah, that is actually a real thing, actually. Like Baron, for instance, Baron got trained by like a Mountain King, so he knows how to use the ability Avatar, and that is a warrior talent that I could just swap out of at any time. It's like, well, canonically, that doesn't make sense. And I do think that there's an immersive piece of that, right? When I'm playing Skyrim, I do want to like RP to a certain extent, where it's like this isn't just, me it's like baseball bats, right? It's not just me picking up the appropriate length and weight baseball bat for, hitting a home run, right? That is mathematically suited for me to hit the home run, which is sort of what, like talents or gear in World of Warcraft like looks like. In Skyrim, I want to sort of express myself through these mechanics, right? I
right.
want to go up certain trees because like they feel like a part of that character. I had a very kind of deep character to my Skyrim guy was like an Imperial thief, and he because you start in like the prison wagon or whatever, the famous memeable prison wagon, and so my thing was that like, okay, he's a thief and he left the Empire because he didn't want to get caught by the Imperials, and he joins the Stormcrow rebellion because he doesn't want his criminal past to, from the Empire to follow him into Skyrim, right? And like there was like a deep RP to that. Like there was a bunch of stuff in there that I went solely for the RP purpose of it, right? Like he was very high in illusion, for instance, and in another there was like a couple of different magic trees. I can't remember what all of them were, but just like that stuff is like more real in those sorts of open world immersive sim games than they are a lot of the time in WoW, because there isn't like meta pressure
Yeah.
when you're playing essentially a single player game.
Yeah, and like meta pressure in a way that like you might even accede to, right? Like like no one wants to be the guy that's like causing the rate to fail because you want to choose your RP talents instead of like the one that's best for the scenario or whatnot. Um, uh, but yeah, huh. I think part of the thing that like still kind of like sticks in my mind, at least for this part of this, is that like it still doesn't feel like there's a like good pressure to like part of the thing in Skyrim is you can be everything at once if you want to, especially if you play for long enough, right? And I don't think that's necessarily the end of the world, but like it feels like part of the reason why stealth archery is the thing that people keep going back to is because there's like not like not a good reason. Like it's not so much that there's not a good reason to do say two-handed combat. There's not a good reason to not do stealth archery, right? Like it is at all times too effective to pass up at least like the cursory opening shot. And it's like I can think of scenarios and I can't remember like maybe I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head, but I'm remembering something where like at some point maybe that stealth archery shot just like it just like does so little damage that it's just not even worth doing, right? And like that has to be in a game with like super hard scaling, so like it's like, well, I'm not really putting anything into this because I did want to put, so I might as well just kind of like wait and hit things with my sword, with the sword itself, or like in that scenario. Maybe that's kind of the only way to do it, is to kind of like put sharp cliffs, right? Like or like build to short clips. Like when you hit the late game, just like plinking someone with an arrow is just like not going to be worth the effort, or like kind of like the time to kind of set up and get that shut off. So you might as well not do it.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about Far Cry New Dawn, which I talked about playing a little bit earlier, is that they had like sort of scalable enemies, and one of the things the enemies scaled into was helmets, so that you couldn't just one shot them anymore with honestly any of these like different stealth weapons, right? Like there's a the kind of iconic weapon in that game is like a saw blade launcher where you put in like a disc in a thing and it like shoots the saw blade, and it magically by physics, but it magically essentially bounces between enemies. So you get these very satisfying moments of like you shoot your saw blade launcher and it like bounces between three guys and kills all of them. But it only will kill those guys like depending on like the rank of you, the rank of the guys or whatever. Um, and you do find yourself in a sort of like an arms race because like at a certain point, if you pick up a sniper rifle, right, and you shoot a guy in the head, it's just gonna it's not gonna kill him. It's gonna get reduced by his helmet, or maybe it'll like plink his helmet off, but you'll have to take another shot, right? And now all of a sudden he's reacting and running, and the alarm is triggered or whatever. And I think that's a pretty effective solution in those sorts of terms because it means that like it is not out of reach for you to keep up with it, but like there are going to be moments where you have to think about encounters dynamically because you are running into higher level or higher capability enemies that you haven't necessarily seen. Honestly, there are enemies in there that even if you plink the helmet off, like the damage scaling on the weapons is so low that like they will like fail to react in the way that you're like talking about, or not fail to react but fail to die in the way that you're
Right.
talking about. And at a certain point, you just won't be able to do that sort of like stealth archery like murder scenario. I think another piece of this, by the way, is ammo. Like this might be another factor for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. The amount of ammo you get
Mm.
for the Predator bow is very low. And and ammo is pretty plentiful in that game. If I want to, I can just stealth around and like pick up, batches of arrows all over the place, right? But that requires me to move, to be dynamic, right? I can't walk into an encounter with, 6 clips of 10 rounds each and just, unload because I only have 5, 6, I don't know, whatever the number is,
Yeah,
right? Like
some small
a
number of
certain,
arrows.
yeah,
Yeah.
some small number of arrows. I also think that there's a bit of arrows itself that lends itself to this, in a good positive way. For instance, like something I remember in Skyrim positively is that like making long arrow shots is not actually that easy, and you have to
Mm.
gauge, like fall off and stuff in a way that guns don't necessarily. Like I think it's harder to be a stealth archer in Skyrim than it is to be a stealth sniper in Fallout just because of the nature of hit scan weapons, right?
Right, right. Right. Yeah. That's absolutely fair. Um yeah, but it's funny you say that though cuz like I associate um the stealth archer thing much more with Skyrim than I do with Fallout, even though I think it is true in both of them. Maybe that's because there's like not as good sniper sight lines in Fallout because like like Skyrim is a lot of like natural things and like the medieval era buildings aren't that tall, so, like you get naturally better sight lines. Um, or maybe it's the opposite of that. Maybe it's because sniper rifles are all zoomed scopes, so you need like you're naturally like you can engage with a bow like the kind of like um bow level distance is like medium to short range, right?
Mhm.
And so like you're sneaking into it. So maybe it's less like being a sniper. It's more like doing like a sneak pistol build in say Fallout. In
See,
turn,
I actually think, well, I would agree with that, but I actually think that the bedrock of it, I also agree with chat. What's up? What's up? Vats also plays a big part of that in Fallout, as being like a pretty core, like cornerstone piece. You just get like an instant shot on somebody. But I actually think that it's an opportunity cost thing. I think that in Fallout, you are more naturally guided into sort of like a stealth sniper build compared to in Skyrim where you are in a high fantasy and you have the potential of being this incredibly powerful wizard, right? Or you have the fantasy of being like a you know a big axe wielding barbarian. Those fantasies are much less pronounced in a science fiction setting than they are in a high fantasy setting, and so you don't feel that tension as much, right?
yeah, no, I think that makes sense, right? Like they're not as this like the characters aren't as distinct, right? Like um the difference between a what's it called a wizard and a barbarian are like even or like mechanically separable, right? Like whereas the difference between like a guy that uses pistols versus a guy that uses sniper rifles doesn't it feels like just like which gun you pick up. Honestly, this reminds me of the problems we have with Starfinder, right?
Yeah.
Things felt the same a lot, even though they tried to separate out the classes a bit, it just didn't stick as much.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly, to be honest. I also think that when it comes to the the stealth sniper scenario in Fallout, that seems so much more in line with what the game kind of expects of you in general, and those skills translate really well, right? Like, yeah, you have a high sneak, but you also just have a high light gun weapon skill, right? And so if you need to go into, you know what I mean? Like the stealth archer never has to the stealth archer, when it goes loud, very rarely will be plinking away with his bow. A lot of the time, the stealth archer, when it goes loud, would want to switch to a greatsword, right?
you're right.
But if you go loud in a stealth sniper scenario, you still just have a gun, and you're
Yeah.
still built towards using your gun very effectively, which I think is kind of like a piece of the puzzle. I also think, by the way, so this is something that Phil just said in chat. That said, I guiltily play a sneak sniper in everything I do, and I think that maybe I don't want to be too hard, I guess, on self sniping. It reminds me of like weirdly enough, 50 Shades of Grey.
You
I
always
remember I
have
had
like
all
the best of these, right? Like you're like it's like
I had
Family
a
Guy.
conversation once. Yeah, I had yeah, I had a conversation once with I think my mom or maybe my dad, where like there was like everyone was talking about like, oh, this is why 50 Shades of Grey is so popular, like going in all of these different directions, just like, oh well, and I was just like, it's porn, you guys. It's not that hard. It's simple. People genuinely engage in the eroticism of the fantasy. That's it. That's the story, right? And I think true, right? Like I think people engage in the fantasy of being a stealth sniper, right? Um, so it's like like at a certain point, it is water finds a crack. But it is also maybe it's just fun to be a stealth
Yeah.
a
So
stealth sniper.
no, I'm but like I think there's a point there in that like maybe it's just like not fun enough to be not a stealth sniper, right? And this is what we were talking about with like
Yeah.
Valhalla, right? Like
Hmm.
like the combat's for like Skyrim's a great game. Melee combat is not super compelling in that game, right? Like
Nope.
it's, you kind of like your hands are in front of you and you swing them, and that's like, and maybe you get like a heavy attack, and that's like the special thing, right?
Yeah,
Like
and maybe you're like watching your stamina bar or something, but like boy oh boy, that is not a common thing, I feel like.
yeah, yeah. I guess part of it too is like I wonder if there's like a really good way to like do like combine these things in a way that like I guess Valhalla is pretty close to it, but like so this is a little off track, but like is Valhalla like outside of like the RP parts, is a Valhalla like a better Skyrim than Skyrim and that kind of stuff because like makes all the forms of combat like compelling.
I mean, my stance on this is very obvious, right? Which is that yes, because we stand on the shoulders of giants,
Sure.
things that come out progressively get better over time. I think Valhalla, for instance, one of the things that just makes Valhalla's combat so good is like that weak point system. By like, I think part of what sucks about ranged in actual combat of Skyrim, being like an archer in the actual combat of Skyrim, is it's very uninteresting and there's not a lot to do. But if you want to be like a range focused character in Valhalla, there are real mechanics that you can interface with to express your mastery and skill, right?
Mm.
By like sniping people's weak points. In fact, this is something I do quite a lot in Valhalla, and I like it, right? Where it's like when you're going up against some of these bigger, more powerful enemies, you have to be really hammering their weak points because you just like don't have a good ability like those Templar guys that run around, the zealots or whatever. It's very hard to do those zealot fights, I've found, without abusing the ranged weak point system or whatever. But that's a whole system that is built on someone expressing their mastery of a character through ranged combat, which is typically not you know it's just typically not something you see all that much. Another note that we got in chat is when fail agrees and says when I build a stealth sniper, I generally have light weapons to back it up. And on a side note, he did a melee build in the most recent Fallout, which was heavily inspired by RP. I've never done a melee inspired Fallout build, but you have, right?
Yeah. So, and for RP reasons, right? And like, I would, very in not in Fallout, but in Skyrim, I would go back as like a half orc and just do unarmed builds because I find that hilarious. But you need mods to really support that to make it work. But or like dumb things, right? Like this is longtime listeners will know that I very much favor kind of like builds that are weird but are still effective type of deal. So like, one hand shield, one hand fist is just like amusing to me, or like two shields, right? Like with bashing or whatever is amusing, which is a thing you can do in Valhalla actually. But like this is kind of my dirty secret. Is like because it's like officially supported in Assassin's Creed, it instantly becomes much less appealing to me. It's like
That's funny. Okay.
I mean, like it doesn't feel like you're bending the rules as much
Mhm.
if you're not doing it the real way. There's a couple of things in there too. I mean, there's this is a way off tangent, but like I also like being left-handed in games because I'm left-handed in real life. Um, and
Oh, so
so
if you can do either hand,
yeah,
interesting.
then that lets you know like that's the form of expression that I'm particularly interested in. But that's that's a whole other discussion. But yeah. Um,
Yeah, I do think that there is another piece of another open world sort of RPG that I'm thinking about is Dragon Age, right? There is sort of support for stealth builds in Dragon Age, but I think that it actually elucidates a bigger, more, I don't know, complex problem, which is just sort of that like the game mode of stealth action is so far removed from a typical action that like in Dragon Age, it's very easy for me to make warrior combat feel good and make mage combat feel good and to make, rogue combat feel good in a very straight up, straightforward way, right? But it is much harder for the Dragon Age games, which have that ability to sort of like give you stealth and give you kind of like stealth options and opportunities to deliver on the same sort of fantasy, just because like engaging in those systems is so far removed from what the game is built to reward, right? And that like at a certain point, maybe what we're really talking about is there is a different kind of like a set of mechanics that define stealth gameplay that is just wholly removed and just happens to be in the same place as the mechanics in uh like an action RPG, if that makes sense. Do you see what I'm saying?
I I think so. Um, yeah. So what? Like it's like the stealth system is such a distinct part of the like such a separate like distinct is in separate from like the action mechanics that's more compelling or am I?
Yeah, like in Dragon Age, you can stealth around, but you really can only use it for like one, wiping aggro in a fight, or two, positioning. You don't have the same ability to sort of like govern encounters and like do patrols and or anything like that, which you would expect in like a Far Cry or a Skyrim, right? Where you can like, here's a lone guy out on his own, I'm gonna pick him off or whatever. In Dragon Age, that sort of thing never happens and would never like and never works that way. If you want to use stealth, you can use stealth in combat as a way to sneak up behind an enemy and get a guaranteed crit on them, or if an enemy is focusing at you, you can drop your threat, or anything along those sorts of lines, right? Where like you can use stealth as sort of like an in-action RPG set. But even though that is using stealth mechanics, I actually would not say that that is stealth gameplay in the same way that any of this other stuff is stealth gameplay, because it's just in interfacing with these mechanics in a completely different way, right? And it's also just like not very supported, I guess I would say. Um, and it would require some pretty hefty redesigns in order to be supported. So in a certain sense, it's sort of like it's not like laying two play styles against one another, where it's like, oh well, I prefer to do stealth. Oh well, I prefer to do whatever. Like a play style might be ranged combat. A play style might be a mage, right? It is two genres that just happen to occupy the same game space. In the same way, like we talk about this with WoW, right? Where it's like, you have raiding and you have rated battlegrounds, and those are two separate genres essentially that both kind of live in the in World of Warcraft. Or like Torghast is a roguelike that just lives in World of Warcraft, as sort of like this like macro game. I think maybe what we're describing is that there is a stealth genre aspect of some of these games, and there is an action genre aspect of some of these games, and the stealth genre is easier to engage with.
So I think there's a lot there that's correct. And I think I don't. I think you're correct, but there's like a nuance that I'm trying to fish out here like so Hitman, right? The especially the new ones. The three came out recently. I haven't played it yet, but um
Mhm.
like that game looks a lot like Far Cry to me. Or in that like you can't exactly go hot, but that's kind of like exterior mission parameters. But like in the actual mechanics of the game, right? Like there's the stealth stuff, but like the the action stuff just is kind of like there, like is there if you need to, like you can like throw briefcases at people or whatever, right? And that's like, and so like maybe the dirty secret is that like Skyrim is like, to accentuate your point, Skyrim is actually a stealth game that has action elements in it, right? Like,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
that's not like
maybe.
that's not what like it means to be, but that's just kind of the way that it ends up falling out, right? Because
Mhm.
like there isn't, this ties back into like the melee combat isn't particularly compelling in Skyrim. There isn't a parallel system of melee mechanics, right? That is as engaging to occupy the same kind of slot as stealth mechanics are, right? So it's not that there's a stealth game and an action combat game in the same system of in Skyrim. It's there's a stealth game and like boring other stuff in Sky, or like boring other forms of combat in Skyrim because they didn't bother to make, or not bother, but like the track just isn't as compelling. Like, because I wouldn't say that the stealth mechanics in Skyrim are particularly well done or particularly compelling. There are better stealth games out there. They're just kind of naturally more compelling by the way things kind of shake out.
I
Um,
actually think that the most compelling aspect of Skyrim, and I do hold true that like Skyrim is a truly great game, right? That it's like, it's like it is part of the pantheon of classic games that we'll talk about in game, theory classes 20 years from now. A college professor will be talking about Skyrim the way that we talk about King Kong, right, in a film class or something. But I think the thing that makes it that is the immersive kind of management sim aspect of it, right? Like the way that it like simulates life in a holistic sense by, like first of all giving you like goals, but just like the small things like inventory management, like the all of the stuff they did with the house. That house DLC is great and a ton of fun. Leveling up leveling up skills like blacksmithing or alchemy, or like these non-combat, it is like that whole picture that I think makes Skyrim a very good game, much less any one of these individual, like any one of these individual parts. And I do think that there is something to say, like, I think that's true of Far Cry, for instance. Far Cry is probably not a game that stands up based on its action mechanics in a true sense. The thing that makes Far Cry interesting is it like presents you with kind of complex problems, and you have to intuit and create sort of emergent solutions, right? It just shows you the outpost, and it shows you a bunch of stuff in that outpost that you could or can do. For instance, here's a cage with a bear in it. If you open that cage, the bear is going to attack the guards, right? You don't have to do that. It's not like it's a mission objective to open the cage and attack the guards or whatever. You just have to clear the outpost. And whatever way you do to do that is up to you, right? Like one of my favorite things to do in Far Cry is lace a place with C4 and then just like watch back. It's like setting up dominoes or something,
right.
right? Where you are you're putting down a bunch of C4 that you can blow whenever you're ready. right? And then you put like remote mines all over the place so that like when reinforcements show up, you know where those reinforcements are going to come. So you hit the one thing, and then everybody starts panicking, and they go to cover. But then there's another C4 there. You blow that one, 5 guys blow up or whatever, and you're just like on the mountaintop, like watching. That's like stealth gameplay in a certain sense, but like the fun of it is in kind of creating that Rube Goldberg machine in your head that is like slowly trickling down all of this death and destruction and mayhem, right? Reinforcements are coming in on a jeep, and then they blow up because you put a remote mine right on the edge of the driveway where they're going to come in, sort of thing, or a proximity mine, whatever they're called,
Yeah.
right on the edge of the driveway. I just don't think the action mechanics have anything that is to that level as satisfying as the stealth mechanics create that level of satisfaction, right? um or even just like ghosting a, like if you kill all of the guys, no alarms get raised and no one ever sees you, you have ghosted the outpost, which gives you like a reward. It gives you like a monetary reward. But that's honestly like barely why I do it. It's just a challenge that makes it more fun and interesting to like slow. It's like you're like the slasher in a slasher movie. You're just like picking off these cards one by one, and you do your reconnaissance. You see where everybody is. You get a good look about where everyone is, and you're like, okay, here are the vulnerable guys. I'm gonna pull them out, or I'm gonna stash a body here to draw someone over to it, and then kill them at the body, sort of thing. And you just like go through, and like those mechanics are just so much more interesting and engaging than the mechanics of shooting guys, I feel like, in most Far Cry games and scenarios.
Hmm. I wonder if there's like, so I see what you're saying, and I think it's right. Like the thing I'm thinking of there is there's like no parallel like loud goal that you can get like opposite it that like would be mutually exclusive, maybe, right? But like I was thinking, like maybe the way you do that is like, have you ever played Devil May Cry?
No.
Have you seen people play Devil May Cry?
Let's no, because I don't know where you're going with this.
So part of the thing with those games, with character action games in general, is like you can like beating the level isn't the hardest thing, but the point is to do it stylishly, right? Like you get like style points as you're beating up enemies, right? So
Sure.
like maybe the right answer here is, in addition to like your ghost objective, you can also have like, beat the beat the level with like 10,000 style points, right? And like that's like really a thing that you, or beat the opposite style points, because there's a thing that you only get kind of going loud because it has to be like chained
Interesting.
action.
I actually think that's correct. In my sense, I think it would be reinforcements. The primary thing that you do when you ghost is you deny them the ability to like reinforce the position. But maybe you make an objective that's like you want them to reinforce the position, and then you defeat the reinforcements, right? So it's like you are attacking the outpost. You successfully attack the outpost, right? And then let's say a timer goes off and it's like 1 minute until reinforcements, and you summon maybe a couple of guys, and now you are kind of playing the defensive aspect,
Mm.
and now you need to take down. They show up with a helicopter, they show up with like really powerful weaponry, but like the only reason that's going to happen is because you decided to like go loud, and now you have to defeat this encounter, which is primarily a loud encounter, right? Maybe you can do a little bit of prep work, maybe you can lace a couple of mines here or there or whatever, but at the end of the day, you want to be with a light machine gun, nailing 50,000 guys,
Yeah,
uh,
and that that
like that kind of thing.
that commensurately gives you a reward that's better for the going loud stuff. Whereas like the ghost thing will give you a ghost reward, right? Like, the
Yeah.
stealth point versus a loud point.
It's
Um,
kind of like one of the things about Assassin's Creed Valhalla that's interesting is like the raiding mechanic, where
mm,
it's like that's definitionally a loud. You can't stealth a fucking raid, right? You are going to ram your boat on shore and just run into the cathedral. I guess if you wanted to, you could get like certain individual like stealth kills or whatever, but it's just I don't know. It's just a completely different skill set than, for instance, one of like those like Templar missions would maybe require you to be stealthy and to use your sort of like stealth game knowledge. Or there actually a better example of this. There are certain places on the map that will have like an aura of distrust, so you have to like kind of like stay low profile. Those areas are places that test your stealth mechanics in the same way that like raids, which are pretty foundational to Valhalla, test your kind of loud
yeah.
mechanics.
No, that's true. But again, like the reason I'm spinning through this is because like I'm interested in like a game that like encourages you to like go loud as like a real choice, right? Like you could be a loud character, you could be a soft character, or a stealth character, and both are like equally rewarded things. And I'm glad to see that at least one of our viewers has good taste and has played Devil May Cry. Um, thank you, Phil. It is a great game and it is so much fun. I had so much fun playing DMC5 last year. Even though I'm not great at it, but I just love that kind of like that filthy style
I
stuff.
do think that actually keys into another piece of it, right? Which is the sort of Payday 2 problem of you are essentially designing two different maps. One of the things that
Mm,
defines Payday 2 is your loadout, right? Like you walk into a map with a loadout, and you can't do a stealth mission transitioning into a loud mission in that game really at all. Maybe on the very low level difficulties, but on any of like the kind of like real meat and potatoes difficulties of that game mode, you need to either walk in with a stealth set or a loud set, and it's defined at creation. And if you fuck it up, you have to restart, right? Like you are very rarely going to be in a position where something I think about all the time is when it comes to WoW rating is sort of the magic of the like half the raid dead 1% kill. We got one of those this week on heroic artificer Zymox, right? And it's a very common thing in progression rating, right? Where the first time that you kill a boss, you are eking it out by the skin of your teeth, and that creates this really exciting feeling, right? You have a bunch of people who are dead, people who have died to these mechanics, it's just 5% left. Oh, can like the DPS and the tanks hold on long enough? And eventually, 80% of the raid is dead, but the remaining couple of guys kill it. And I was thinking about this the other day, and I was like, it is remarkable how often that is the case, and how it's almost engineered to be the case, right? But now when we go into fights, for instance, in normal Nathria, right? When we're going into fights that we downed in that same way, with like half the raid dead or whatever, now we defeat those encounters as a matter of course, with nobody dying at all, right? Um, and maybe this is just like a testament to the ability of kind of humans to progressively iteratively improve on things like this. Like, it is remarkable to me the difference between a 1% wipe and a kill in terms of like week over week. Like, once you get a kill on a boss, it really feels like you have that boss down and you can come back and you can do it again, and you are so much better at doing it, right? um and that is a feeling that kind of gets engineered in a certain sort of sense in like stealth games where you end up going loud, but like you eke it out. If I'm doing a payday run, right, and we're robbing a bank, and for 90% of the run we've got it on stealth, but then just like one person randomly walks by, sees a guy, calls the cops, and now I have to eke out the last 10% of that mission in loud. That's really engaging and kind of like tense in a way that I don't know. It's like interesting. But in most scenarios, if I'm in a Payday 2 lobby and as soon as that person calls the cops, everyone's gonna restart. Which is like another just weird problem of
yeah,
the stealth genre and the action genre living next to each other.
yeah, because that's a good point, right? Because like you could see like the value in trying to eke out that finish, right? Like if takes you 40 minutes to do the stealth part, it's like, well, it's worth finishing it out to get the reward at the end, right? Like this is kind of like why it's worth finishing out like a mythic plus that you're not going to time, right?
Correct, yeah.
Um, but like there's definitely a point at which that the switch flips, and in single player games like we've gone over, it comes down to save scumming a bunch, right? Like maybe that's like a good defensive like why checkpoints are still a thing in games instead of being instant saves at all times, right? Like
I actually do think, by the way, that now that I'm thinking about Assassin's Creed, or I'm sorry, now I'm thinking about Payday 2 has a bunch of really interesting mechanics that I think other stealth games would do well to adopt. Like other open world stealth games would do well to adopt in order to preserve that. Like, one of the core foundations of Payday 2 stealth gameplay is what's called pagers, which is if you kill a guard, right, they they radio a pager in their like dying breath, essentially, right? So if you kill a guard, you knock a guard out, they're going to click on their pager, and someone is going to go to that pager and go, "Hey, are you all right?" And you have to answer, right? And you get 4 of these, right? So and answering takes like 30 seconds. You sit on that corpse and you answer the pager for 30 seconds where you're talking into the pager, right? This makes the act of killing guys very dangerous in Payday 2, which is absolutely not the case in most other stealth games, right? Because not only do you have to kill the guy, you have to then sit on his corpse, and you are expending an incredibly valuable. Oh, this is the other piece of it. You only get 4 pages, right? So you can do this 4 times in a mission. The 5th time, the guy on the other end of the walkie-talkie will realize something is up, and he's going to call the cops on you, right? So the alarm will naturally go off. So you can't kill more than 4 people. The moment you kill a 5th person and you let that pager go, you are fucked, essentially. And what this means mechanically is, one, killing guys is a real resource that you have to think very carefully about, right? Killing wrong or bad targets has negative consequences, right? Like if you kill a guy who's doing a route out in the middle of nowhere that is very unlikely to see you or your group or whatever, he has a lot less valuable a kill than the guy sitting right outside the vault, right? Maybe you can just sneak right past that guy, but it's much harder, right? And it also means that you can't kind of take kills at off on the fly. Taking on the fly kills almost always will mean somebody catches you on the pager, because you're sitting there on the corpse of a guy in the middle of everything for 30 seconds, and you're frozen there before you can take that body and move it to like a better location out of the way, right? Like you want to throw it in a dumpster so nobody sees it again, you can, but you have to sit on it for 30 seconds and hold down the interact button. If somebody comes up and you can't just shoot that guy as well, which is something you could do in like Fallout or in like Skyrim. And it also means that you're just going to be leaving lots of guards up, right? So over the course of the entire mission, you're not whittling the number of guards down such that at the end there's only one guy, and as long as you keep him in sight and you know where he is, you're fine. You never have to worry about, his line of sight or his issues at all. You can just walk up behind him and kill him, essentially, right? Because there's going to be so many guards that you are not going to have the mathematical ability to kill, that you are always going to have to be worried about. So I don't know. That's an interesting mechanic in terms of, preserving or making stealth gameplay better. Like that is a mechanic that I think makes stealth gameplay and action gameplay better, because it means that, you just can't, in a game of Payday, if you are going to stealth through the whole thing, you're going to have to really work at it. Right. I guess is what I would say. It is not a water finds a, like a water finds a crack strategy.
Hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, huh? Huh. Yeah. No, it's interesting because like that makes sense for like, so we talked about like a stealth perfect run. We talked about a potential solution for like like a a full loud run, like, and it's like, well, is there a way to then also like encourage, like, allow uh like a hybrid run that doesn't like, but like at that point, right? Like, so my thought is that like if you equally, like, if there's a way to do a hybrid run that's also advantageous, like, then you either have to give a specific hybrid run reward, or like you end up like pushing things in one direction or another, or if you like kind of like make the reward structure flat, I think it still ends up drifting towards stealth archery for all the reasons we've been discussing over the whole cast. It's huh. I don't know if I'm
I think
gonna.
another piece of that is also the way that if I kill a guard in Deus Ex, I get 20 XP or whatever.
Right.
If I knock that guard out stealthily, I still get that 20 XP. If I just avoid that guard, I don't get experience.
Hmm.
If I don't kill the guys in Far Cry, I don't get that experience. In fact, I definitionally have to literally kill every single person in the outpost in order to defeat an outpost encounter. So, in on one end, Payday is directing you away from the full lethal, right? You're just going to leave a bunch of guys up. But you're also not, you're never going to be in a situation where like um you get to get experience from those. Like maybe you could do a thing where at the end of a mission or something like that, you get experience as if you killed every guard that never saw you, right?
Right.
Or something kind of along those lines.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's fair too, right? Like, yeah, that's it's, you know, I think the easier answer there is like you just don't generate like you don't generate experience based on like paydays like this, right? Like it's based on the mission, right? It's not like
Yeah,
it's not like you get experience per person killed. You just get experience for finishing the mission, right? Like which um
correct. Yeah,
uh
I mean, we've talked a lot about experience on the cast, and the more we've talked about it, the more solidly I feel that like experience should come from that. I really don't think experience in games should come from those sorts of low level objectives almost at all anymore, frankly. Like the way that we do experience in a D&D game where it's like, did you accomplish the quest, here's your experience, is generally the best way to do it, rather than like banking a certain amount of experience. Oh well, you killed 9 wolves and you got 100 experience for each of them, split 4 ways or whatever.
yeah, I mean, I think there's so the Angry GM has an article about why that is entirely wrong and why you must be
Oh really?
yeah. It's a little bit of an older one, but it's interesting because like I don't like the thing he described as being the problem is I don't feel that as much, but like I think that there's this like weird kind of like ludo narrative problem with tabletop games, in that like you know if you're playing a video game, right, like you can feel the experience you've missed by like not like there's theoretically like experience on the map that you don't get, right? Like whereas in a tabletop game, like encounters you don't do aren't like how do I put it? They're not like potential encounters missed aren't particularly real in a tabletop game, right? Because it's not like you're running back through the game at a different point and picking that up so you can contrast it, right? Like it's not like you can like
Okay.
go
Yeah.
on. It's not like you can go on like game FAQs and see like which encounters you missed in the adventure pass and thus which kind of like loot you've missed. Like that's I think that's part of the like that's part of like the inherent kind of like mental problem with tabletop. It's not a problem, but like the differences with TTRPGs, right? Like is things missed don't really exist in a way like you in order to make those have weight you have to like signal to the player that they've missed them, and that's like a hard thing to do in a tabletop RPG setting because it's all a narrative, right? Like it's almost like a Chekhov's like an inverse Chekhov's guns or a converse Chekhov's gun, if that makes sense. Am I making any sense at all?
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense to me. Though I do think in a certain way it doesn't matter. Like that's a little like extra to what I think of as, I don't know. Um I guess I feel like experience is a currency you gain by doing stuff, right?
Right.
So I don't really think of it as in the opportunity cost of like what is the potential that I'm missing. It is what is the reward that I got for doing what I did. Do you know what I mean?
Right. No, but like that's. I think you're right. I think that's why it doesn't map. Like I think that even though it kind of like comes out of the tradition of TTRPGs, that's kind of like a guideline for like GMs to be able to pace their own stuff, right? Like it's in less than in kind of like a video game where it's kind of like a hard marker, right?
Mm,
Like um uh because like yeah, like I mean, because it's like your motivation for doing anything in a TTRPG has to be kind of like driven by the story first and foremost, right? Like I think like in a TTRPG, you never go and like okay, we need to find like a pack of wolves to slay to gain experience, right? Like
yeah.
even like we need to go train with them is like maybe makes sense, but like I've never been in a scenario where that like even like is a thing that anybody wants to do, right? No one wants to like you know grind combat encounters to like level up. People want to level up because they see like the power that their character gains down the road, but like it's it kind of doesn't make sense to kind of like honestly, funnily enough, like the only system where I think that this comes into effect this the system works like that is Star Wars,
Yeah.
because everything's so piecemeal, right? And it's like, well, we can do this thing, and it's not even like, and it's still given at the experience is given at the mission level anyway. So I don't know. I don't know. I feel like there's a whole cast in there maybe, but and my thoughts aren't super organized on it. And we're a little bit off of stealth archery, and we're hitting the hour mark. Do you have anything else you want to talk about that, or do you want to move into our
I
list?
think we covered it. I feel like we really got to the bottom of this one. The one thing that I like, I feel like a real answer to this that maybe we'll see over time is better AI. That is
Yeah,
the underrepresented piece of the
I
puzzle
think I
that I
agree with
don't
you.
think people talk a lot about. Whereas it's just that like the AI systems in a lot of these games is not very complicated, and the more complicated it becomes, the better it becomes. The more sophisticated it becomes, the more this problem will sort of like go away or change. I guess really, is what
Yeah,
I would rather sort of say.
I think that there's a piece of this too that maybe we'll see at some point, which is like how much fun is like a realistic AI going to be in this scenario, right? Like,
Hmm.
if you want to play stealth and every time you shoot someone, everybody just hides for like 6 hours. It's not like a fun thing to do, right?
Yeah,
Like, yeah, unless you make like waiting, I guess, like and like like being able to hit like the wait key to be like a real intrinsic part of the game. Um, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, uh,
anyway, how was your week? What did you do? Tell me all about it.
I mean, so maybe we should start with, since we've forgotten about it for the past couple of weeks, where kind of where I left it off is like Star Wars, right? Like how like we,
Yes,
we both
Star
played.
Wars. We should talk about Star Wars, which we have been playing a whole bunch.
Yeah, so we've been doing this uh Ocean's 11 is maybe not the right, but we've been doing this bank
Hmm.
heist, over the past like what 3 or 4 weeks,
Yeah.
and it's been what have you thought of it so far? Because you came in a
I
little
had a
bit
lot
late.
of fun. I really enjoyed. There was one session where I really loved it, which was there was the one where we were like first casing people. We were getting an understanding of who the different people inside of the heist were. And the person that I went to talk to was Eliza, and I actually fucked that up really hardcore. Like I whiffed my stealth checks. She was using these force powers on me, but like there was just like a very good character moment of in the encounter where it turns out Eliza's a Jedi who's trying to get like the gem, and she hates clones because obviously Omega is a clone, but Omega is all like Omega also resents the Empire for essentially, because he doesn't have an inhibitor chip, he didn't respond to Order 66, but he watched all of his compatriots do that, right? And that was just like a really nice, like potent story moment that I was a big fan of. I haven't really done as much when it came to this. I definitely feel the encounter was not really built for heavy combat characters, which is what Omega more or less is. There was a good amount of sort of like stealthing around and figuring shit out, which is always like fun, and I like that aspect of Omega, which is a different. Normally I'm kind of playing a quasi face in some variety, but Omega has no face stuff. He is all brawn, all agility, right? Built for athletics checks, coordination checks, acrobatics checks, and shooting guys. So you know, yeah,
Yeah, no, I think we've got an interesting dynamic coming down, because like we've got like Arc is basically our face, and then like we've got like what I like to call the engineer core, and they all like they love to like sit down, like X especially loves to like sit down and like figure out the plan, and right, and then D4 is like, what are we got? Well, point me at the computer, let me hack it, right? I think
I
that's
know
like
that's the thing that I love is like the let's find a computer to hack it. Like not like, oh, there happens to be a computer here. I'm so glad that D4, our amazing slicer, is in the party. It's like, no, there's a computer somewhere near, and I bet it's gonna give us something good. Let's find it, right?
How hard would it?
Which
How hard would it be for me to hack something to substitute for these social checks? It's like a thing that happens all the
yeah,
time.
that but to be honest, I think that would bug me. Maybe I don't know. In other versions of games, maybe that would bug me, but it actually seems right in Star Wars. I guess in a way, I don't know how else to describe this, but like Star Wars, it does feel like a more skill focused game than something like Dungeons and Dragons, right? So like, I would probably be frustrated if like the wizard kept trying to cast spells to like circumvent sort of like social problems, but there's something about it all being skill checks that just sort of like feels fair in my I don't know how else to describe this. It just like feels fair to try and like goose encounters by playing to your strengths as a slicer or a mechanic or whatever else.
Right. And I think the other side of this too, and maybe this is the thing that will work out better for us if we decide to embrace it, is like, D4 figuring out what he can do on a computer in a fight, I think is a reasonable thing for him to do. And I think he's pretty decent at it, right? That or he just
Hmm.
kind of like hides in a corner and is like, I just won't care for this fight, which, I think with the size of our party, that's a little bit more feasible
Yeah.
than like in other things. But like maybe the answer on the other side is for the combat characters to be like, well, maybe there's something I can shoot in this social encounter, right? Like, and not be and not be like a terrible idea. But like that's essentially what happened at the it's like the stealth, like everybody stealthing around to do this heist. It's like, well, we could it's Omega and Jad are like lined up, and we could just like shoot the shit out of
I,
these two
I
guys.
I really enjoyed the RP of having an ion pistol in one hand to shoot the like alarm and a regular pistol in the other hand to shoot the guy, you know, to like disable the force field around the gem. Like that's just like a really neat image, I feel like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I thought that worked out. Like I don't know, I like even though like for most of that session, like I was not doing a lot, right? Like like Jab was not doing a lot. Jab was like, this is the social session, and like the sniper, the dour sniper Gungan just kind of like stood and like made suggestions, like like most of my talking in like that part of it was like Mango talking as like a strategist more than it was Jad, which
Yeah.
less. I'm less happy with that than you know, I would have rather been in Jad, and maybe I should have pushed myself more in that direction. But it was fine. Um, but I think that that's like fine, and it's cool that it works out that way because like D&D and PF2E, like as much as people want it to be like it's built around these pillars of exploration and social interaction. It's like no, it's combat. Everything revolves around combat, right? Like fully 2/3 of the mechanics at least are combat in the and that's fine, but like being a not combat character doesn't make sense in your typical fantasy RPG.
Yeah, are you enjoying are you we talked at the end of the session about the possibility of like we have this time slot, we have this group, but maybe we try a new system, do another thing. Are you feeling fatigued by Star Wars? Are you enjoying late game Star Wars? We've been doing the Star Wars game for a couple of months now, at least, almost.
It's over a year,
I
I
don't remember when
think.
over a year.
It's close to it at
Oh, you're
least.
right, because it came out this time last year because it was The
The-
Mandalorian was in December, and we
Well, no,
watched
no,
The
the Mandalorian.
Mandalorian and
We
started
we
playing.
watched the Mandalorian late, but like that was what the seed was, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Mhm.
well, okay, so it's not quite a year yet because the other part of the inspiration here was the lockdown, and
Oh, yeah, it was quarantine. Yeah, that's
yeah.
true.
So like it's probably like close to 11 months or 10 to 11 months, I think at this point. Um, but yeah, so I'm enjoying it. Like I'm enjoying it mostly just like purely on story basis, right? Because like combat encounters are kind of trivialized, but at this point for all of
Fair enough.
us, um, and it's not. It doesn't feel bad. It's just kind of like it feels great to roll a die and like have like 72 damage. It's like haha, I'm the best sniper, and I sniped real good. Um, but like I could see myself enjoying a different kind of game system, but like I don't like not that I wouldn't enjoy those things. It's just that like those things would all require a much bigger kind of investment, right? Like I don't think you could have like a drop in drop out D&D game um that is as compelling. Um apparently our GM is watching. All right, we need to change the topic right now.
So interestingly enough, I think the thing that I'm responding to most in Star Wars is getting something every session, which is not common to like in D&D a lot of the time in our or like Pathfinder in our games, it's like 2 or 3 sessions in order to like level up or to like get or like the new stuff that you get like very rarely kind of like kicks in every session. But this like every session you're gaining a big chunk of experience which feels great and fun, right? And I really look forward to that. Like I'm responding
Hmm.
very much to the I want to get the next talent, the next talent in my tree or, the next point like skill point to make my whatever checks better, right? Like that's something that is fairly unique. I almost sort of think that it feels like we're just leveling up every session, and I wonder what it would be like to play a Pathfinder or a Dungeons and Dragons game where that is the case, where every session you at the end of every session you gain a level, right? And you become a
So
like whatever.
So there's, I think, a different version of this, and I don't know if they have it for 2e, but I know in 1e there are alternate rules for like doing like getting features at like an accelerated rate. That like
Hmm.
so like you level up in PF2e. I know this a little bit like like I just hit level 4 in one of my games, and I got a class feat and a skill feat, or it was level 8. But so like if like that was split up, right? Like if I got the skill feat at like a certain point in level, and I got like a class feat, and like those were based out a little bit more, because that's effectively what Star Wars is doing, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
it's
definitely.
unbundling those features. That might be an uh interesting way to do it.
Oh my
Uh,
god. Fail just said the greatest thing in chat. I hear Pathfinder 2e is like 4th edition D&D and I'm all for it. I also am all for it. I loved 4th edition.
it is not quite like 4e in that way, but it is. I love PF2e. It's a lot of fun.
I've actually been hearing some very bad things about 2nd edition Pathfinder recently. A YouTube video popped up on my recommended list that was like, I'm leaving Pathfinder 2nd edition and here's why. And I watched that video, and then I got a bunch of other, it's like the algorithm was like, "Oh, you fucking hate Pathfinder 2nd edition? Oh, let me show you all these videos about people being mad about it."
You'll
So
have
I
to forward
guess
that on to me. What's like the thesis there? Do you like, or what's the general
that
thesis?
so the thesis is that RP sucks and that combat is a slog. Um and the guy is like, or no, it is that like the only real rules that exist for the game are combat. Nobody uses the RP rules for the encounters, right? People are just talking, right? And that's fine and that's fair. But like you can just do that in any system, right? So at that point, the only thing you're using the system for is combat rules, right? And the Pathfinder second edition rules are just so fucking crunchy that it just like removes all the fun out of those combat encounters because people hyper optimize basically. Um,
PF2
and they're
is
just doing the
much
same
less.
thing.
It's much less crunchy than money, though, right? Like,
I guess that's fair, but he just talks about how like the people just they fall into these. It's like a rotation in WoW, right?
okay,
Um,
I could understand that, and that like there's like it feels like maybe there's like less kind of like there's less like the system's a little bit like the math is much cleaner, right? So like there's maybe not
yeah,
as much joy in kind of like in like abusing the crunch. Like 1e, you could go crazy, right? Which is like fun in its own way, but like it also like I don't know, makes like I feel like PF1E is more fun in theory than it is in practice, if that makes sense. Right?
hmm
Like you build your character, like, oh boy, I'm gonna do all this cool stuff with my character, and then you like trivialize combat encounters, right? Like that's like not like super fun. Um and like the like the 2e side of that is like maybe things are a little samey, right? Like maybe like you don't have enough options, but like that might just be kind of like we've got like 3 books, right? Like Pathfinder, and they're not doing the splat books like they did in 1e, which
yeah,
is probably for the better. But like if we were 10 years into if we're 10 years into 2e and we don't have the kind of breadth. Like, I think there's maybe a case that like the right way to play PF2E is to be a little bit generous, kind of like bonus stuff, right? Like maybe let people um like have a couple extra feats in different ways that like because like I find that like at level feats don't stack with each other so much as they're like different paths, and so long as like you're not like letting things stack too much, I don't think there's a problem, if that makes sense. Um,
yeah. So and then the thing that he basically ended on was saying like, look, if I'm playing the game purely for its combat rules, right? Because I'm not using, we're not using any of the social stuff, and my two options are essentially fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons and 2e. Fifth edition is just more kind of like streamlined and straightforward. I don't know. I'll find the video, and
you could
you can make your. I'm probably paraphrasing his arguments in a pretty
no,
like not great way. But it was very interesting. I've still never played 2e,
yeah,
so
fair
I
enough,
don't
fair
have
enough.
a an understanding of you know whether or not he's right or wrong.
No, I would definitely be interested. Like I think playing I play a lot of. I am in 3 2E games at this point. So I like it'd be a fun thing to do. But like I would love to at least like play like a short term thing with the people in the Star Wars group, just to kind of like feel that out and like get your feedback on the experience too, right? Because like it's an interesting system.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm like in a far flung future. Maybe not a far flung future. I don't know. I am enjoying Star Wars, and I would be voting no in that situation. But I wouldn't want if people start getting like bored of the game. I would just want to transition into another system and having fun doing that, um, rather than you know
so
I don't know.
so interesting thing, just because it came up in the chat. Ragnarok, our current Star Wars GM, says I like hitting on twos. It's interesting because like that's not a thing that's like keyed as much to like your particular choice of builds, but like in the 2E game that I'm playing, and like the kind of primary, or the one where we're furthest along, the fighter hits on like low numbers, right? Like he hits on like
Hmm.
fives, almost. Um, which is super interesting. Like none of the other characters get close to that, but they're all good at different things. So that's like I think a thing that's like a little bit, and it's not as good as hitting on twos, but it's a thing that's more inherent to the class than it is to kind of like the um than it is to kind of like your feet built out, if that makes sense. Um, uh, and it part of that too is that like you can't have like hits on twos as much because like of the 10 up system. But the 10 up system is I think a lot of fun for generating crits. Like I think there's interesting choices to be made a lot in PF2E because on your second action you could swing again. But if you swing again, you're taking it at a minus 5, maybe -4 if you're using an agile weapon. But you could also like make another check that doesn't have that attack penalty, right? Like you could like make an intimidate check. You could cast a spell if you're something else, right? Like you could move and reposition. I think that like makes the combat much more dynamic, at least than the one-e conga line of death. Um, uh, so
Not that I want any of you to click away, but just to immediately fulfill this for those of you in chat, I have linked the video. For those of you listening to the podcast, the video is in the description.
mm,
So maybe this is something that like we can talk about it once you have watched. We can talk about this next week or whatever if you watch the video and summarize your thoughts. I'm very outside of this conversation. I've never played a real 5e game. I've never played a real 2e game, so I don't have any kind of mode of comparison for either of them. But it was just sort of like interesting, like interesting to watch. I think one of the things that Pathfinder 1e does really well, that is sort of like the I like hitting on twos thing, is when your stars align and you are strong at the thing, it feels great. Right? Like I'm reminded of on Kolbjorn, right? All of the like the feat stacking that I did to have my my trips, right? Like trigger, the trip, and then they move a different square, and that triggers all these AOs, and I'm pummeling the shit out of the guys. Every single one of these attacks does like a million damage or whatever. That wasn't an insanely common thing to happen, and a lot of the times, like I just wasn't in a good. You can't trip a fucking ooze, right? But like in the instance that I could trip the thing, it was the that was like the highlight, right? This is something that the WoW lead Ian Hazakostas talks about, where he's like, we want classes to be balanced, but we don't want them to be homogenized, right? So if you are a class and you are good at the thing, we want you to be good at that thing, and we want people to recognize that you are good at that thing and bring you for the reason that you are good at that specific thing. Arms warriors have the best execute damage in the game. Right, there is no class in the game when a boss or an encounter hits like sub 20% health, 35% health, or whatever, that is going to out DPS an arms warrior. And execute damage is the most valuable type of damage in the game. So you'll see in raid, like in raid environments, right? Um, People will bring warriors for that specific purpose, right? Where it is like, okay, we wanna kill the boss. It is so close to death. we're not going to battle res the Retribution Paladin. Shout out to my boy Penlad, who's not listening to this, but is the top Retribution Paladin in our raid. We're gonna battle res Phalanor because Phalanor is an arms warrior who's doing execute damage, right? Or whatever that looks like for whatever spec or class in the game, right? Um, and I think that's a little bit of what One was like facilitating. And I would be interested to hear or know if Pathfinder Second Edition has sort of failed that in a way, because I think Fourth Edition failed that in a way. Where it did homogenize a little bit too much, and it became very hard for like the different classes to sort of like stand out or have standout moments in the way that I could have standout moments in my brawler build on Kolbjorn, or you could have standout moments, with I don't know, whatever you were doing on Beauregard.
Yeah. Well, Beauregard was weird. Like right, like
Yeah. Beauregard is, I guess, a little outside of
Atticus was had his like his
sure.
Sphinx
Or like
moments.
other people in
Yeah.
Hell's Rebels had standout moments.
So I'm
Obviously,
going to tell you that that is absolutely not the case. Like I can
okay.
but I think the thing is it's not dependent on your like skill as a character builder, which is I think maybe what the problem is, right? Like
Interesting.
right, like we like I could like again the same game, right? The fighter crits all the fucking time, right? Like because he's got such a high bonus, right? Like he has to roll marginally well and he'll get a crit, right? Like my character's a cleric. If somebody some like the rogue has like the battle medicine skill, right? And he'll like do a moderate heal, and I'll be like, "What are you doing with your mortal medicine?" Abadar blesses you, and it's like 60 healing. Everybody's like, "Oh, that's disgusting! Like disgusting amount of healing, right?" It's like, well, that's what the cleric does, right? He does a disgusting amount of
Sure.
healing, right? Like so, like, but like that's like inherent to the cleric, right? Like, and it's not like a thing I chose to, right? Like, I'm playing kind of like a hybrid battle cleric, right? Or like it's one of the doctrines, but like he's still really good at healing, and that's what he does. Or like and like when it needs to happen, it happens. And it's not like a I didn't choose to make him an excellent healer. He is kind of by his nature an excellent healer. If that makes sense. So, it's I don't know. I also think that like just again, I'm gonna say this is relatively early impression still because like I haven't played any game to like super high level, but like how like I would say that like Pathfinder 1 felt really good around like 5th level. Like that's when you had enough power to be like not terrible. And like
Yeah, we talked about like 5 to 12 or something. Like
yeah.
that was the sweet spot.
Yeah, it feels like the curve is pushed up a little bit, right? Like I feel like I'm really coming into that now in the game where I'm at 8th level. It also does a good job of like 1st level not being terrible. So like that curve's flat a little bit, and I think 5e is very good at keeping that relatively flat across everything, right? Like you never like you don't like like PF2 2e by design hyperscales you, right? Like the curve is like this in terms of your power level, right? Like if you go fight something, 5e is very flat. But like even though the scaling hyperscales in PF2e, like the kind of like power like relative power unlocking or like options unlocking is a little bit like builds up, but it's a little bit like right now at 8th level, I feel like I'm fully coming into a place where like I have a good set of options to do in any fight against the character of my level. And like if I'm going from new player to like through a campaign, I think that's the right pace. I don't think it's bad for lower levels. So, like it makes you feel like you have progress without like goosing the numbers, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Even though PF2 does goose the numbers very hard, and I think that's different. That's got different sort of effects. Whereas 5 is actually also good at that, but just in a different way. I don't know. I think they're both very good games. So, there's that. But I'll watch the video. There'll be more to talk about. We spent like the back half of this talking. Like I think we both just like I haven't played anything besides WoW. Even though I'm not even playing it that much. I just like haven't had time to put it. Have you gone back to Valhalla, or are you just playing WoW?
Just playing WoW. So the other thing I'm doing is Stardew Valley.
Okay, right.
I put a ton of time into Stardew Valley with a couple of friends. And I have been playing more WoW, and I'm good. I feel good about like the WoW. Like I just completed. I did more mythics this week than in any other week, just by virtue of I really wanted to get there's what's called there's the 1 chest, the 4 chest, the 10 chest, right? The 10 chest says you get an item based on the lowest mythic that you did in the week, right? And I really wanted my 10 chest to be at a plus 10 or higher for mythics, right? So I wanted to do 10 mythics that were 10, 11, 12, right? Kind of all the way up. And I wanted my front chest to be a 12 because that increases the item level by 3. So I'm going to have one piece of 223 gear, two pieces of 220 gear in my chest that I'm going to open tomorrow. Um that's great and that feels really good and I'm really like excited about it, but I actually did a lot of 8s and 9s this week to try and like get people into 10s, and also just like because I was hanging out with the group and we were doing like with group stuff. So I actually ended up doing probably like 15 mythics over the course of this week. And I just love it, man. I am a pig in shit when it comes to these fucking mythics. I know them like so well. And this is one of the other things about it is that because I went Necrolord's Arms Warrior, Necrolord's Arms Warrior gives you a 3-minute kind of group CD. Um, that increases your crit by 10% and then two other people's kind of like crit by 10%. I've gotten really good and really precise with my banner where it's like, okay, I know where I'm dropping my banner. Like, where are the good pulls for the banner? And it's not just a 3-minute CD. Like, whiffing a 3-minute CD is bad, so I hold it a lot of the times, and I'll hold it for like, this is a rough pack. Boom, we're gonna drop the banner. We're gonna give everybody 20% health, everybody 10% crit. We're gonna really like just like nuke these packs down. Um, and I don't know, and that's been great, and that's been a lot of fun. And the funny thing is, this is apparently a terrible week to do Mythic Plus. Everybody said so. Everybody was like, "Fucking Mythics are awful this week. They are god awful this week." And I don't want to do any fucking like. We're gonna do one, Mythic this week because the affixes are so bad or whatever. And I guess I get that. But from my perspective, it's yeah, not everyone. Phalanor is with me on this one, and good on you, Phalanor. But we had a bunch of friends. We were like talking about this in raid. We had a bunch of friends who were like, "Oh, gross, bolstering necrotic. I'm only gonna do like one affix this week, which is fine. Or I'm gonna do like one mythic this week, which is fine." But like because I want to be like good at mythics, I just don't like feel like I don't know. It's like a slippery slope if you start looking at affixes and being like, "Oh, this is a good week. Oh, this is a bad week." Like it's just another week. Just do the content according to how the affixes sort of like direct your play, if that makes sense. So for instance, on a bolstering week, which says that when a mob dies, it increases the damage of the other mobs in a pack by 20%. So you don't want to take big pulls. You want to bring everybody down very evenly. And I had a bunch of groups wiped to this because they weren't respecting the bolstering. People were doing pulls like they would in other weeks and getting these big groups of like 7, 8 guys, and then 7 of them die, and the 8th one is like one-shotting people. But yeah, from my perspective, I don't want mythics to be a kind of like one key fits all locks scenario where it's like you're doing the same pulls each week, you're approaching them in the same way each week. I want to like respect those affixes and make decisions about those affixes that are like interesting and dynamic. And this has been a really interesting week for it. Also, I just feel like I'm getting really good at pugging. This might be a good topic for later, like just to bookmark this thought for a second. I think the manual pugging system of Mythic Plus is good, and I think it might be a better matchmaking system, I think maybe, than certain other games' automatic matchmaking systems. Really, I'm calling League out here. I think the way that League does matchmaking, where you just enter a queue and you get matched, might be worse than the way that WoW facilitates pickup groups in for Mythic Plus. But that's I
Interesting.
maybe
I
we can
think
maybe talk about that a little bit later. Yeah.
that sounds like a full topic. That sounds like an interesting
Yeah.
topic. All right, couple of things in this kind of vein. One, have you heard of Out? I think it's called Outriders.
Nope.
It's a looter shooter coming out in. It's supposed to come out in February, but it's coming out in like April, I think. But there's an open beta coming in February, and like one of the things is that like it looks kind of like almost like a soft
Oh, I
read for.
have heard of this actually.
It
Yes,
looks kind
because
of
it
like
is
a
the
discount anthem, right? Like
yeah. Mhm.
but one of the things is that like the end game content is supposed to be like mythics, right? Like or like riffs, right? So like maybe that'd be an interesting thing. There's a
Oh, interesting.
and
Yeah,
like
I learned about this because someone said this was Anthems but good on Twitter, and I watched the YouTube video and I was like, huh. That there sure is a game coming out, and
No,
I didn't think about it past that at all, to be honest.
friend of the cast, Monarch, pointed it out to me. And I was because like I like the looter shooter games. I like I'm watching a video and it's like the same thing. I looked at this is just it seems just like I checked the developer because I was like, is this like a stealth relaunch of Anthem? Because like it might be.
Well, no, it's Square Enix, right?
Right. Like I was only half joking though. Like that's why I went and checked the publisher, right? Because like if it had been I'd be like, this is like like is this like a secret stealth relaunch of Anthem? But it's
Oh, these are the people who did Painkiller. Interesting, interesting.
yeah. I'm definitely gonna check out the open beta. But like that just there because like apparently the end game stuff is like affixes on dungeons. Seemed like
Oh, wow, these guys did a bunch of Gears of War shit. The ports, obviously,
mm.
but that's just like that's it. That's interesting. Okay, look at this.
And the other thing, this is back to WoW stuff, is I so this week I I I was angry when I did it, but I went and I got the right rating legendary and
Oh, did you feel good about it?
no, but like then in one of the fights that we cleared, I outperformed my item level, whereas previously I'd been underperforming my item level. Right, like I parsed above like where I should have. Like I didn't parse great, but like
Mhm.
my parse was better than it should have been relative to my item level. I was like, okay, I guess this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, see, I get that. I definitely do. I feel like there are certain legendaries that I like for certain kinds of content, and I don't feel like right now I'm using the kind of one size fits all legendary, which is like great and which is fun. But before this, I had used one called Battle Lord, which was only really good in raid. It wasn't really good. It was bad in mythics. It was kind of bad in all other content. Um, and I think that's gonna end up being more true over time, where it's gonna be like, okay, here's a good rating legendary, here's a good PvP legendary, here's a good mythics legendary. As people get more soul ash and they can have multiple kind of high end legendaries.
Yeah, no. So the limiting factor for me at this point is gold, because like
Oh,
I can't afford the level 4 piece. Uh,
wow. Okay.
yeah, I mean I'm also like not super deep into it, but like and I'm not like grinding for money, but
Yeah.
um, or like I have a level 3 though. I have two level 3s, which maybe if I hadn't done that, I would be in a better position to get a level 4. But yeah,
Honestly, that's pretty good. I would say, like obviously the amount of item level you get by going up the ranks decreases. So like the difference between a 225 and a 235 is not all that much, but like the gold difference between those is going to be huge,
yeah,
obviously.
and not
So
only that, but like it's a single item increasing, right? Whereas like I've got like bigger differentials to hit in other slots, just kind of.
you're also it. Well, what slot does that legendary go on? Shoulders?
So it can go on shoulder or head. I wanted to put it on the head, but I had a shoulder at 225, so I
You can maybe talk to our good friend of the cast, Lindley, Josh, because I think he did shoulders for his legendary. This is another interesting thing is that like I spent a ton of time and honestly a ton of gold. Eventually I was just like I want all of the plate legendary recipes maxed out. So I just started churning my gold really really hard and I probably spent through 6 million gold over the course of, like of doing this, but I now have all the plate recipes at 235. So if any of our friends is like, "Hey, I need a 235," all they would need to do is give me the mats, right? And I could craft that for them instead of doing it on the auction house, which is obviously going to have a premium. So that hasn't quite happened for the other. There just aren't gold makers. The core gold makers I know are me, Phalanor, and Sarian, and we're all in plate. So that just hasn't really happened for leather or for cloth.
hmm,
Legendaries in quite the same way.
fair enough. Well, doesn't matter so much for me because I guess like you said, 225 is probably good enough for government work as it were. So
Yeah.
uh, yeah, but it at least gives me something to look forward to in raid. It's like I can do good in raid. But yeah,
I
but yeah.
recently switched my build in raid because I was doing pretty poorly because we were ironically killing things too fast for my build. My build is very technically complicated in that it basically revolves around hitting a really powerful war banner right at the start of execute phase. And so normally I open with a war banner and then execute phase happens and I place another war banner and I get a bunch of crit chance and I get a bunch of crit damage and I'm just executing for disgusting amounts of damage. And if I can like get all those ducks in a row, it really works. But in normal, we're beating bosses too quickly because we beat bosses in like 3 minutes now. So I really only have one war banner. I don't have two anymore. And in heroic, we're not reliably getting into execute like into clean execute phases like that anymore. Um, so I went back to a more generalized sort of all-purpose build to spread my damage out rather than just like really hyper focus on like getting these insane crits in execute phase. Though those insane crits are insanely cool and very fun, right?
Yeah, I get that. I definitely get that. Uh, all right. Well, we're over time by almost 10 minutes, so I think we should wrap it up. Um,
Okay.
if you'd like to email us about any of the things we talked about on this podcast, or anything else you're feeling, you can email us at or podcast at subduersplaygames.com or subduersplaygames@gmail.com. Also twitch.tv/subduersplaygames, where this is live now. You can rate, review us on wherever you find podcasts, all that other stuff. Follow us on social media. All the links are in the various descriptions. That's everything I have. But do you have anything else you want to promote?
I have nothing else I'm looking to promote.
In that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.
You.